This has been a crime for a very long time. And for them, the Chagossians people, this has got nothing to do with the geopolitical matters. This is something that is very personal to them. This is a personal matter. Families were removed from the islands decades ago. My wife comes from the Seychelles, and she was one of the first people that were given the British passport from the Chagos Island. Now, I do have this conversation with my mother-in-law, and she remembers actually being displaced when all these things were happening. They were put on a boat. She was holding onto a tightrope on a boat on the way to the Seychelles. So good afternoon, people. So this afternoon we're going to talk about a very contentious issue. So currently I'm in Tenerife. Tenerife is a very small island in Spain. It's very close to some parts of Africa, particularly Morocco. However, it's not an area where you can just go straight from Tenerife to Morocco. There's no direct route. When you look at the geographical distance, it's only about 300 kilometers away. By flight, we're talking about 1.5 hours to 2 hours flight from Tenerife to Morocco. So the issue we're going to talk about today is a very contentious issue. Like I said, it's a multi-layered issue that keeps changing very, very quickly. So we all know in 2024, the UK government made what it called a historic decision. That historic decision was to hand over the Chagos Islands back to Mauritius. Now, on paper, all this looked like a very clean break. It was a clean break from the colonial past, from the colonial mess. But since that moment, nothing has gone to plan. Now, we're talking about the President of the United States of America, Mr. Donald Trump, actually calling this whole thing an act of great stupidity. Since then, there have been regional issues across the Indian Ocean, and the people that were actually born there, the Chagossians themselves, have taken the United Kingdom to court because they were left out of the entire deal. And now, as of March 2026, what was presented as a done deal is anything but done. So the main issue now we have to ask ourselves is, what actually happened? Why are we where we are today? And why is this small group of islands now sitting at the center of a much bigger global power struggle? And this is what we're going to talk about in this video. I'm not going to talk about the historical context from how the Chagos Island came into being. We're simply going to talk about from the time that Keir Starmer actually handed over the Chagos Island, from that moment, and just to see where we are and just to see why this issue has not progressed further than it should. So in May 2025, after years of legal pressure, including international rulings, the UK government under Keir Starmer signed a treaty. So the terms were very simple on the surface. Mauritius would gain sovereignty over the Chagos Islands, while the UK would keep control of the Diego Garcia. Some people called it Diego Garcia or Diego Garcia, whichever way that makes sense. But I've actually put it there for those of you that are not familiar with this term, then you can see what that means. So the Diego Garcia basically is a military base, and the UK at the time of signing this agreement would mean that it would keep control of Diego Garcia military base under a long-term lease of 99 years. This was presented as a solution, a way to close a long-running dispute while keeping one of the most important military bases in the world secure. Even the United States signaled it. It was comfortable with the arrangement at the time that this deal was happening. But then January 2026, the tone changed. As soon as Donald Trump returned to office in his second term, he publicly criticized the deal. Trump was basically questioning the logic behind handing over that strategic territory and raising a concern that sits underneath all of this influence. And because from that point on, this was no longer just a UK-Mauritius issue. This had become something far bigger than just the two countries, which is Mauritius and the United Kingdom. The United States had come in, and now this is one of the most contentious geopolitical issues currently happening in the world. And now recently we've seen that more voices have even entered the conversation, because we recently, just last week, we saw the Maldives actually step forward, and it made it very clear that they were not comfortable with this direction things were taking, raising questions about maritime boundaries and who actually has a claim over the surrounding waters. But obviously what Britain said is that this is between, they still maintain that this is an issue that is between Mauritius and the United Kingdom, and they do not expect any other countries such as the Maldives to actually get themselves involved. I mean, when you really look at it, yes, this is about the two countries, the United Kingdom and Mauritius. But then anything to do with the maritime, we always have those gray areas, as you can see. So you're talking about what sits around it. Okay, so we're talking about fishing rights, we are talking about resources, you're talking about strategic access. There's so many issues that might be involved within the maritime boundaries, and that's probably the reason why the Maldives feel the need to actually comment and also be a part of these contentious issues. But the only problem here is that the people at the center of it all, the Chagossians themselves, these are the people that have been forgotten. This has been a crime for a very long time. And for them, the Chagossians people, this has got nothing to do with the geopolitical matters. This is something that is very personal to them. This is a personal matter. Families were removed from the islands decades ago. My wife comes from the Seychelles, and she was one of the first people that were given the British passport from the Chagos Islands. Now, I do have this conversation with my mother-in-law, and she remembers actually being displaced when all these things were happening. They were put on a boat. She was holding onto a tightrope on a boat on the way to the Seychelles, where they were displaced to. That's where she currently lives, and you can imagine the trauma behind it. She remembers vividly. There were some animals as well in that particular boat. So when she narrates all of these issues, you can imagine 1 minute you've got all your family around you, you're having a good time and everything was good, and then suddenly somebody feels the need. And this is what has been happening. When we talk about these colonial issues that have happened in the past, people were displaced against their wish. And this is exactly what has happened. My own mother-in-law has experienced this particular issue. And when my wife came in the United Kingdom, they were promised more than just a passport. But obviously, when she came to the United Kingdom, she learned that all this was basically, well, I don't want to use the but they were misled. They were misled because they were promised much more than a passport. And obviously, when she came to the United Kingdom, she found herself in a fix that she had to do everything by herself, to figure everything out by herself, because apparently all that deal of being given a passport just ended at the passport. In fact, at the time, they were not even entitled to have any kind of welfare from the British government, because they had to have lived in this country for a certain period of time. So you can imagine all that. It was just simply give them the passports, they'll be happy, they'll go to the United Kingdom, and that was it. So the Chagossians, these are people that have had, like I say, their families were removed from the islands decades ago. They've watched decisions being made again and again without their direct involvement. That frustration for most of them turned into action. There have been legal challenges, there have been public protests, and even attempts to physically return to parts of the island. Now, recently we even saw a group of the Chagossians actually that went back on a boat to prove a point, and I think all of that was to send a very strong message to the government to say, well, this is not just about us being involved in this issue, but we want to return back to the island. It's nothing to do with the geopolitical issues. This was a very strong reminder to the government that this story isn't just about the government. This involves us, and what we want is to return back to the island. We're not interested in this compensation as promised, because there have been lots of promises in the past that have not come to fruition. Some Chagossians actually want to go and settle down in the Chagos Island itself. They want the physical rights to actually stay there as a people. There are some Chagossians that are not interested in that. There will be others that will just simply want the compensation because they've now settled down wherever they are. So this story is not just about the government, it's about the people, the Chagossians themselves. So one of the most important questions that we really need to be asking here is that why doesn't the UK simply conclude this deal? Because this deal really has been going on. It's been taking different turns and twists. 1 minute, Mr. Donald Trump appears to be supporting it. The next minute, depending on his mood, he's coming up with all sorts of issues. And again, the prime minister is flip-flopping over the matter. 1 minute, he's supporting it. The other minute, he seems to be listening to the United States of America. There just doesn't seem to be a concrete decision to take by these leaders to say, well, this is what we want. I mean, if you think of it, it wasn't an easy decision for the Prime Minister to make, to actually hand over the Chagos Island back to Mauritius. That was not a decision that just came overnight. This must have been a decision for the Prime Minister that was very difficult to make. He must have pondered about this decision, and now why is the finishing part of it not gaining traction or not gaining ground? The process inside the UK is not fully complete. Parliament is still debating over the matter. We've got the Prime Minister that is still getting a lot of jibe from the opposition, particularly in the House of Commons. So we've seen all these issues back and forth. We look at the mainstream media. Up to now, this is a very contentious issue that has divided opinion at the very top level. So legal challenges have not completely disappeared. We've got external pressure, especially from the United States, particularly even in the wake of the Iran war. This is something that we've seen. Recently, he asked Congress to debate over the matter to see whether the United States can actually take control and start using that military base to retaliate against Iran. Now, when the Prime Minister said, no, we're not going to do that, this base can only be used to defend ourselves, and that's when the President of the United States reached out to Congress in a bid to want more control over this particular island. So the pressure has not gone away. So what we have now is we have a situation where the deal exists, because that deal has not gone away from the time that the Prime Minister actually handed over the Chagos Island back to Mauritius. This issue has not disappeared. So the outcome is very, very uncertain. Okay, so this is a kind of a geopolitical limbo, where everyone is watching, but no one is fully in control. Okay, and this is where people are saying, well, I think leaders must take control of the situation, and it would be nice to see this matter be concluded amicably until the very end. So in view of all of this, what happens next? So there are three things to watch. First, we've got the UK itself, because until the full legal and parliamentary process is complete, the deal is not fully settled. And then number two, we've got the role of the United States. Now, the United States, this is one of the issues, particularly in the wake of the Iran war. We've seen that they've taken a completely different interest in this particular base, because Diego Garcia is not just a British base. Its strategic importance means the United States will always have a say, and this is something that the British people will have to live with, and I know it's always been a joint military effort for the United States and the British, but the British people have got more say over the Diego Garcia military base. And the third, we've got the unresolved question at the center of all of this, the Chagossians, the very people at the center of this, because no matter how governments redraw the maps or question the people, or they question their identity, or they all of these things, their identity will not disappear. The identity still remains the same. No matter what you do, you can debate these issues as a geopolitical matter, but the Chagossians will always remain as the Chagossians. And that is why this story matters. And this is why this is about the people. Now, unfortunately, the two governments, whether it's the United States or the United Kingdom, they are putting all these debates around them and actually forgetting the people that actually matter. We all know this was not about returning the land. It had nothing to do with returning the land to the Chagossians people. This is about power. This is about influence. It's about access to the military base, with nothing to do with the Chagos Island. And I think this is where the frustration is. A lot of Chagossians feel very let down, because in the midst of all these conversations, they are the least of the problem when it comes to the debate of this particular island between these two big nations. Because at the end of the day, there's a question of who gets to decide what justice actually looks like. And right now, that question is still wide open. So for those of you that are joining me for the first time, my name is NB. This is War We Are Reclaiming.